Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a new session. I hope all of you are doing great, and I hope all of you are keeping healthy because your exams are very near. So it's very important that you take utmost care of yourself, right? So keep studying, that's great, but also do take care of yourself. All right? With that being said, let's get started with our session tonight, right? Okay, so let me start by sharing my screen with you all. Great. I believe all of you can see the screen. Yes. So welcome again to our UPPSC exam practice session 6. Okay. All right. Very good. Now, please do like the session. Okay. Let's move on to the first question for tonight. Here we go. Can you all see the question? Yes, I hope you can, right? Yes. Okay. Let's read. Yes, good evening, and welcome. Right. Now let's start. Okay? Inshallah. In Can the Subaltern Speak? Spivak critiques Foucault and Deleuze for failing to recognize that their concept of the intellectual often results in dash. So, Can the Subaltern Speak? It is one of the most important works by Spivak, where she deliberates on the idea that whether the subalterns can ever really speak up for themselves. And it is in this connection that Spivak critiques these theorists and thinkers like Foucault and Deleuze for failing to recognize that their concept of the intellectual often results in what? A true liberation of the subaltern consciousness? No. This essay doesn't really talk about true liberation of the subaltern consciousness. So absolutely wrong. Is it the essentialist utopian belief that the oppressed can act and know for themselves without mediation? This is what Spivak is critiquing Foucault and Deleuze for. Right? So in Can the Subaltern Speak? Spivak critiques Foucault and Deleuze for failing to recognize that their concept of the intellectual often results in the unconscious reinscription of colonial imperialist power structures and the erasure of the international division of labor. Their work effectively creates an innocent or transparent intellectual who claims to represent the oppressed while actually consolidating Western Eurocentric dominance. So the figure of the intellectual that was propagated by thinkers like Foucault and Deleuze, in, I mean, unknowingly, their figure of the intellectual was reclaiming the imperialist or colonial power dynamics. Actually, they were trying to voice the concerns of the subalterns, but unknowingly, they ended up reclaiming the power structures, the power dynamics of the colonial masters. Okay, so that's why Spivak critiques Foucault and Deleuze in her essay Can the Subaltern Speak? Okay, next. In Midnight's Children, Salim Sinai frequently admits to misremembering dates and factual events. Example, the date of Gandhi's assassination. What literary technique does this primarily illustrate? So he's forgetting things. He cannot remember the facts very precisely. So what is it telling us? Is it telling us that there is omniscient third person narrative? It cannot be omniscient because omniscient means the narrator who knows it all. But here, Salim Sinai is forgetting things. So how can he be omniscient? So wrong. Linear post-colonial historiography. We have to remember This novel, Midnight's Children, it's a novel with postmodern sensibilities. It shows histories in fractures and something which is fractured, something which is discontinuous. It cannot be presented to the readers in a linear fashion. That goes against postmodern sensibilities. So, two is very wrong. So, is it showing us unreliable narrator and the subjective nature of memory? Yes, because with time, our memory fades. With time, our memory fades. It also highlights Salim Sinai's positionality as an unreliable narrator in this work. Okay, so it is unreliable narrator and the subjective nature of memory. How memory fades with time. How memory is subject to the works of time. All right, clear. So Salim Sinai's errors, like placing Gandhi's assassination on the wrong date, it highlights that history is subjective, fragmented, and it is shaped by personal memory rather than objective absolute truth. All right, I hope you all got it correctly. Next. Analyze the imagery in stanza 4 of Keats's Ode to a Nightingale. So, in this stanza 4 of Keats's Ode to a Nightingale, this line goes like this. Already with thee, here thee means the nightingale. Already with thee, tender is the night, but here there is no light. So the speaker is saying he's already with the nightingale. The night is tender, but there is no light. He cannot see things. So what philosophical shift does this mark in this ode? Tell me. Ode to a Nightingale is one of the 6 great odes by John Keats. I hope all of you have read this ode. Please do, okay, if you haven't as of yet. It is a shift from physical reality to a spiritual imagined realm. Stanza 4 of John Keats's Ode to a Nightingale, it marks a pivotal shift. It marks a significant shift from a desire for physical intoxication to a complete surrender to the power of imagination and poetry. The imagery transitions from the dull brain of human reality to a sensory rich, embalmed darkness that defines the Nightingale's world. So this shift is very much sensual, it is sensory. It's alluding to the senses of the poet. All right? Okay. Next. The narrative structure of the God of Small Things is frequently described as fragmented or non-linear, mirroring the traumatized memories of the characters. Which of the following best describes the structural technique which is used to introduce the terror of Sophie Maule's death? So how is this the terror of Sophie Maule's death introduced through the narrative technique of this novel? So tell me how this terror, how this trauma is captured through the narrative technique. It is a prolapses, means flash forward. It is deferred until the final chapters. The structural technique that best describes the introduction of the terror of Sophie Maule's death in The God of Small Things is the use of non-linear flashbacks that reveal the emotional aftermath and effects of the event long before the actual cause is disclosed. All right, so prolapses or flash forward is used. Right, next. According to Samuel Johnson in the preface to Shakespeare, what is the first defect of Shakespeare characterized as sacrificing virtue to convenience? We know that Johnson, in his preface to Shakespeare, published in 1765, said that Shakespeare is someone who sacrifices virtue to convenience. So why Samuel Johnson said so. What was the reason that he said this about Shakespeare in his preface to Shakespeare? Because Shakespeare was more careful about pleasing people than to instruct them. Because Shakespeare was more attentive towards pleasing people rather than instructing them. So, according to Johnson, in preface to Shakespeare, the first defect that Shakespeare sacrifices, the first defect is that Shakespeare sacrifices virtue to convenience. Because Shakespeare fails to enforce strict moral purpose in his plays. Johnson also argues that Shakespeare prioritizes pleasing his audience over instructing them, frequently also allowing the characters to act immorally without punishment and neglecting to explicitly condemn evil, which he believed was a writer's duty. So, here, what is happening is Johnson is saying that what? That Shakespeare was not very particular about the morals conveyed in his plays. He often led his characters, or he often allowed his characters to indulge in wrongdoings. And always the characters who are indulging in wrongdoings, they were not even always punished properly. So this looseness of morality is critiqued here by Johnson. And so he said that Shakespeare sacrifices virtue to convenience. Okay, clear? Right. In the defense of Lucknow, Tennyson frequently employs the refrain, and ever upon the topmost roof, our banner of England blew. What is the primary artistic purpose of this recurring imagery? And ever upon the topmost roof, our banner of England blew. What is this imagery telling you? What is it telling you? It emphasizes the triumph of Victorian imperial ideology over the 1857 rebellion. Right? So in Alfred Lord Tennyson's The Defense of Lucknow, this recurring refrain, and ever upon the topmost roof, our banner of England blew. It serves as a powerful symbol of unyielding British imperial power, national identity, and psychological resilience during 1857 siege of Lucknow. Okay, so it emphasizes what? The triumph of Victorian imperial ideology, right? The banner of England is blowing above everything. Right. Next. Which literary device or theme does Anita Desai primarily employ to the scraps of dry gray, white, and brown vegetation in the desolate, broken down landscape surrounding Carignano? So, what is this landscape symbolizing here? What does this landscape stand for? Does it have any symbolic significance in this novel? This desolate, barren landscape surrounding Carignano of Nandakol. Yes, this landscape is pathetic fallacy which reflects Nandakol's inner barrenness, her inner vacuum, her inner barrenness. In Fire on the Mountain, Anita Desai primarily employs the desolate landscape of Carignano and its dry, muted vegetation as a profound symbolic or allegorical representation of the protagonist Nandakol's inner world, specifically her deep-seated existential alienation, longing for emptiness, and emotional exhaustion. The barren, stark environment acts as an extension of Nanda's own psyche, which reflects her desire for solitude and her deliberate retreat from the complex, demanding, and messy relationships of her past. The landscape here The landscape surrounding her house, it's a projection of her inner dryness, her inner barrenness, her uh, alienation. Okay, right, very good. So it's a pathetic fallacy reflecting Nanda calls inner vacuum. Okay, next. Which of the following best reflects J.S. Mill's justification for free speech in On Liberty? Tell me, it's very easy. It's a very easy question from J.S. Mill's On Liberty. Here, what does he say about free speech? Yes. He says that false opinions should be allowed because they help to keep alive the living truth through the conflict of ideas. I would request all of you to go through these works once and please see the ideas which have been explored in these works. This can be very important. Sometimes only reading summaries won't help you in PSC level exams. You have to go through the works and look at the arguments which have been made there. All right? Yes. In the Westland, Eliot's use of Tiresias as a unifying consciousness is often misinterpreted. According to T.S. Eliot's own notes, which of the following is true? Again, quite easy. Yeah, what is true is that, yes, what Tiresias sees is the substance of the poem, as he is the most important personage uniting all the rest. So according to T.S. Eliot's own notes to the Westland, we can gather this, that Tiresias is the most important character, the most important figure in this poem. The consciousness of Tiresias brings together all the components of this poem together. Tiresias here is a mere spectator and not indeed a character. So he is more of an onlooker. And in this Westland, Tiresias functions as a unifying consciousness because all the women in the poem are one woman and the two sexes meet in him. All right, so this is how Tiresias is projected as a unifying consciousness in whom all components come together and meet. In whom all components come together and meet. Okay, right. Next. So we are starting our West Bengal assistant professor interview course. If you're planning to go for these interviews for assistant professorship, you can join our course and prepare with us. This time we have planned an intensive course for you all. It will be 8 intensive 2-hour sessions of interview skills, where we will be providing you training in 8 subject areas. The fees is only rupees 3,000. Okay. Right. Next. What critical, often overlooked aspect of the novel is highlighted in the study? Jane Eyre, the invisible bisexual. Jane Eyre, the invisible bisexual is actually an important article. Okay. Jane Eyre, the invisible bisexual. It's an important article by Christine L. Rowland. And this essay talks about the homoerotic tension between Jane Eyre and Helen Burns of Lowood School. It argues that Jane's intense sapphic connections, particularly at Lowood, are overlooked, and her true happiness is found through these emotional bonds rather than strictly heterosexual ones. So this essay, Jane Eyre, the invisible bisexual, it tries to look into the bisexual aspects of Jane Eyre and her intense sapphic connections with Helen Burns. Okay, right? So this essay challenges the traditional heteronormative narrative, arguing that Jane's relationships are rooted in desire and that her marriage to Rochester occurs only after he is emasculated, reflecting her complex, non-monosexual orientation. Okay, you can look into this further. Jane Eyre, the invisible bisexual. All right, next. In the opening scene of Heart of Darkness, the narrator notes that Marlowe is the only sailor among them who still followed the sea. How does this immediately set up the narrative framework? So now we have a question from Heart of Darkness of Joseph Conrad. Yes. Tell me. It highlights the contrast between the passive, civilized listeners on the Nelly and the active, corrupted experience of Marlowe. Nelly was the boat on which they were sitting at the opening of the novella. Okay. Okay, we can do a bit more of an explanation for this. So the narrator's observation that Marlowe is the only sailor among them who still followed the sea, it immediately establishes a frame narrative that sets up the story as a journey into profound, unsettling experience, rather than a simple adventure tale. This detail distinguishes Marlowe from his conventional peers, positioning him as a wanderer and an outsider capable of perceiving the darkness that others and traditional stories ignore. Okay, next. In the prologue of Dr. Faustus by Marlowe, the chorus compares Faustus's intellectual trajectory and downfall to which mythological figure, signaling the theme of overreaching ambition. We know that the protagonists of Marlowe are overreachers. They are overreachers. They have excessive ambition. So, in the chorus of this play, Faustus's intellectual trajectory and downfall is compared to which mythological figure? It is Icarus. It is Icarus. So, in the prologue of Marlowe's Dr. Faustus, the chorus compares Faustus's intellectual trajectory and downfall to the mythological figure Icarus. The chorus explicitly states that swollen with cunning and self-conceit, Faustus's waxen wings did mount above his reach, signaling his overreaching ambition and inevitable fall. And it's a direct reference to Icarus, who flew too close to the sun on wings of wax and feathers created by his father Daedalus. So here we find a direct reference to Icarus. All right, yes. So that's all for tonight from our side. I hope you guys loved the questions and enjoyed the discussion. And that's all for tonight then. And if you want, you can join our West Bengal Assistant Professor Interview course. Okay? Right. So that's all then for tonight. Please do like the session. I will see you all again tomorrow at 9:30. Okay?